Hi, I'm Claire, and today we are talking about genre-bending books. Books that combine elements of different genres or tropes of different genres to create something altogether different. Now, this is the third video in our BooktubeSFF Babbles series for the BooktubeSFF Awards, so this is a topic of conversation that we definitely encourage everybody to engage with. If you would like to see the full list of the babbles, I will put it up. If you would like to check out the website for the BooktubeSFF Awards, there will be a link for that in the description box below. But the basic idea is we would love to hear your opinions about this topic and all of the others, so please let me know in the comments below what are your favorite genre bending books, or if you have a blog post or a Twitter thread or a video or an Instagram post or whatever about this BooktubeSFF Babble topic, please do let me know, because I would like to go and check them all out. I was really excited when the topic of genre bending books came up in our BooktubeSFF Babbles chat when we were setting all of the topics with me and the other judges, because I love a science fantasy book. Now obviously it's me and it's also the BooktubeSFF Awards, so all of these books are going to be mostly SFF. Some of it is going to be like a particular element in the book or a specific trope that's being used, or a setting, maybe even just like the general atmosphere of the book. So I'm really excited to get started with this list. Now, I couldn't talk about science fantasy without talking about where my love of it came from, and I think if you've been here on the channel for a little while, you will not be surprised to hear me once again bring up Dragonriders of Pern, which I was really into when I was a teenager. This series by Anne McCaffrey has over 15 books in it, and the cover of it, as you can see, looks very like classic fantasy, but it has this tiny prologue of like a page and a half at the beginning of every book in the series that tells you a lot of information you don't really need to know about like what system the planet is in and what body orbits in an elliptical, erratical fashion around the planet Pern, and like how it picks up the threadfall that is the antagonist, well, the force of nature that they are fighting against in all of those books. And so, you know, when you read these as a kid, you're kind of like, okay, I don't really understand why this is there, but sure, fine, I know what an Oort cloud is now. I'm great at pub quiz if that comes up as a question. But then midway through the series, like something like 7 or 8 books in, suddenly the kind of medieval lords and dragon riders in this series just find an artificial intelligence buried in the ground, and because they've been excavating and they like cleared the rubble of the solar panel, the robot like comes back online and goes like, hi, oh, so much time has passed, let me teach you how to make computers again. And it's like, it blew my little mind when I was a teenager. Like, I was like, what is this? Medieval people discovering computers, amazing, I want it. So this is a series that, you know, for all I loved it when I was a teen, I wouldn't necessarily recommend today, because there is a lot of stuff that does not age well in this series. All of the relationships sit on a like yikes at minimum to extremely rapey at worst kind of spectrum. The understanding of how queer people work is not the best, and there are a lot of like women fighting against other women and not being like other girls. The disability representation is like, you tried, Anne McCaffrey, but you didn't know what you were doing. So, you know, would not necessarily recommend it now. What I always recommend in place of Dragonriders of Pern, that also happens to be somewhat genre-bendy, is Temeraire by Naomi Novik, which was published as His Majesty's Dragon in the US. This is the Napoleonic War with dragons, so it is historical fantasy, which maybe started as genre-bendy, but now I feel like it's established as its own genre. But it's also kind of like military fantasy, which I feel like is a subgenre of fantasy that like we really don't have a lot of. So I guess I'm calling it genre-bendy because it's historical and military and fantasy, but also because I don't really want to mention Dragonriders of Pern without mentioning an alternative with cool dragons and dragon riders. If you are interested in that, I mean, I would say read Dragonriders of Pern if you're already reading a lot of SF and are interested in the history of the genre, because those books were quite influential to a lot of people and won some awards and stuff. But like, if you're coming to the genre now and you just want to read a cool book with dragons, Temeraire is where you should probably go. Next up, we have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and now this is basically science fiction. It is lesbian necromancers in space, and it is based around a competition where all of the ruling houses of this crumbling space empire go to a specific planet to like compete to see who's going to become a new necromancer servant to the emperor. But the thing is, because of the like type of narrative that it is, even though it definitely is science fiction, it definitely is set on a planet, they are on spaceships half the time, the necromancy that they do is clearly like based around science and stuff. First of all, there is necromancy, it looks magical. Even though there might be scientific underpinnings, the effect that it has when you're reading the book is they're doing cool magic. So that certainly, to me, made it feel more like fantasy, but also the other thing that to me feels very like epic fantasy about this book is the writing and the atmosphere. Now, the protagonist is really cool and foul-mouthed and like kind of moving through this world making snarky comments about it, but around her you've got all the necromancers of all of the houses and their cavaliers who are protecting them. You have like Ninth House, Keepers of the Locked Tomb, House of the Sewn Tongue, the Black Vestals. You have all these trappings of epic fantasy, and then all of a sudden they're on a spaceship, and it's just this really, really cool mix of atmosphere that just feels very like foreboding and intense, and like you could just imagine that you are in a really, really intense epic fantasy with the fate of the world resting on your shoulders, but then, you know, spaceships. And I think it's illustrated very well by the fact that if you open the book, like there is a dramatis personae, like list of characters in the first few pages, which to me feels like something you get in a fantasy book more than in a sci-fi book, because like it has that atmosphere. It's also a cracking awesome read, so definitely recommend this one. Next up, we've got Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. Maybe this would be classed as urban fantasy. I don't know. It is set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland world that has been ravaged by a climate catastrophe, and we are on the land of Dinata, which was formerly a reservation of the Navajo Nation, and now it has been reclaimed and reborn, and in this kind of post-apocalyptic landscape, which feels like a very science fictional setting, we have gods and mythology and magic, and our main character Maggie is a monster hunter, demon hunter, and she is the most badass. It's got quite a Buffy vibe, which I love, but just because of the combination of this very science fictional setting with the fantasy elements of it, to me that elevated this book and made it even more memorable than it would have been just because of the story or the writing, which are both great, but just like the combination of that setting and that magic was fantastic. Next up, we've got probably what is the most like straight up science fantasy book of all of these, and that is the Book of the Ancestor series by Mark Lawrence. Red Sister, Grey Sister, and Holy Sister. I've read the first two, really enjoyed them. I read them for last year's BooktubeSFF Awards. I still need to catch up with the third book in the series, which I definitely intend to do because it was a fun time with the first two. These books are set in a world which clearly used to be a lot more technologically advanced than it is at the point where we start the story. We've got a fairly traditional fantasy premise where our protagonist Nonna Grey is an orphan and a nobody, and she is about to meet a grisly end because she angered some very, very powerful people, but she is rescued by the abbess of the Convent of the Sisters of Mercy, if I recall the name properly. It's a convent, but they're like training to be assassins and spies, and so Nonna goes to the convent and like starts to learn how to be a Sister of Mercy, and it's all about her training and her life, and it's a really, really fun, enjoyable read. She's a great protagonist, but the thing is, little by little, as the books are going ahead, you start figuring out that there are a few things that are a little science fictional in there. Like, I really hope we get a resolution to how come there's so many science fictional elements to this world in the final book. I don't know if we will. I don't know how I will feel about it if we don't. Like, there could be an argument for leaving some of that up in the air, because it might not necessarily make sense for Nana to get all of the answers, but I want all of the answers, so I hope we find out. But these are really fun books, and I would recommend them, although they are quite violent. There is quite a lot of people getting beat up all the time, so bear that in mind. There is quite a bit of actual violence in these books. It's grisly. Speaking of grisly, next up we've got Dread Nation by Justin Ireland. This is a historical zombie novel. Zombies rose at the Battle of Gettysburg, therefore ending the American Civil War quite a bit early, because they needed to all fight against the zombies and not fight about slavery. And this book actually takes place some 16 years after that historical deviation, when we follow a young black woman who is sent to a school to learn how to fight zombies, to defend white people against zombies, because, you know, of course, just having the Civil War ending earlier does not mean that the entire history of race relations in the US is, like, erased. It is just changed. This is, I guess, a fairly traditional, like, alternate history, historical fantasy kind of premise. Something changed and then the world had to adjust around it. But then it's also got zombies, which I feel are a very, like, traditional sci-fi kind of trope or creature. And then it's also got a little bit of a Wild West vibe, because, not to give away too many spoilers, but at some point in the book they kind of go into more of a settler territory, and there's more of that, like, kind of frontier vibe to the story. So that's another kind of, like, little thing that, you know, makes this not a straightforward book. I'm not sure if that's genre bendy, but it's certainly not straightforward. Actually, another book this made me think of, just speaking about this book and the general conceit, is the Clockwork Century series by Cherie Priest, starting with Bone Shaker. I don't actually have that book here to show you, and I just thought of it now, so it didn't prepare what I was gonna say. But it is another alternate history with zombies set in the American Civil War, so I would also recommend it. I also really, really enjoyed that series. And again, like, there is some, like, I guess post-apocalyptic vibes to that book, as well as zombies, as well as this, like, historical setting that's more traditionally associated with historical fantasy. And finally, we've got Arabella of Mars by David D. Levine. This is such a wonderful mishmash of a book. The series is actually finished. Now there's 2 more books aside from this one. I haven't read them yet, but I have them on my TBR. I'm very excited to get to them at some point. The back cover calls it The Delicious Love Child of Jane Austen, Patrick O'Brien, and Jules Verne, and it's not wrong. It's not wrong at all. This is kind of like historical science fantasy. The portion of this book that is set on Earth feels very kind of Edwardian, Jane Austen. Arabella, our protagonist, when she's on Earth, has to be, like, very proper and, you know, follow the conventions of her time, including not running away on adventures because she's a girl. But then she, like, goes to Mars on a sail ship, where the navigator of the sail ship is an automaton that may or may not have sentience. And then they get to Mars, where Arabella grew up, and there's Martians. And, you know, they have completely different, like, cultures and rituals because they're Martians. And so it has so many, like, trappings of historical fiction, historical fantasy, steampunk, just straight up sci-fi. It's got Martians. When you're reading it, it kind of feels like you're reading some like classic sci-fi because the writing is so lush and descriptive and beautiful, but at the same time it's not difficult to read at all. I think this book is probably going to make an appearance in my underhyped SFF video for the next BooktubeSFF Babbles topic because I love it and I've not heard enough people talk about it. So Arabella of Mars, highly recommend. So that's it. These were my recommendations for genre-bending books. Let me know what you think about these, if you've read them or if you have other ideas for different genre-bendy things that you've read, that you've loved, that maybe I would love if I read them. Please let me know. I'm always looking for recommendations. And if you have done a video or post or anything else like that for the BooktubeSFF Babbles, please do let me know as well. I do want to see them. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you very soon indeed. If you'd like to see more from me, you can check out a previous video on screen right now. And if you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button that's on my face for a new video from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.